I'd also like to begin with a story, actually with two stories. The problem starts, or we can see it, with our own children. When they are, say, 6 years old and they go to first grade, it's so exciting. They're so motivated. Just picking out their backpack or their pencils is a huge experience. And they walk to school. These are our three kids. The youngest one there is 6. We spend a lot of time picking out those backpacks. And they get to school and they start with tremendous motivation, tremendous energy, tremendous curiosity. As far as they're concerned, they can do anything. They'll try anything. No one has given them a piece of paper like this with lots of red marks on it that show what they can't do or what they did wrong. And then what happens? This is a graph of engagement starting in first grade and going straight downhill. So in other words, we start at the top. We start with maximum of everything, and then we start losing it. Our school systems are desperate to figure out how can we make people more interested? How can we engage them? How can we make them curious? Well, maybe start with not taking it out of them. Maybe start with the motto of medicine, which is do no harm. So the first challenge is how can we go up instead of down? And then the next problem is at the end of the system. You finally graduate from university, and suddenly you're lost. You're outside. You've been in a framework your whole life. You've had everything defined for you. And suddenly you're expected to deal with a completely open situation. A situation where you have no idea what's happening, what you're supposed to do, how to navigate, even what you care about, what you're good at. These are basically mysteries when you graduate from university or whenever you get out of the school system. So the reason we're facing this problem is that our education system was constructed about 200 years ago in Prussia. It's still very structured. It's still, despite all the reforms, there's great teaching, there's great innovations, there's technology. We keep putting stuff on top of the Prussian system, but it's still the Prussian system. And it's still a form of spoon feeding. We talk about spoon feeding, that it happens in the classroom when there's frontal teaching. But it's not just the frontal teaching that's spoon feeding, it's the whole school, because everything is defined for you when you go into which class, with which teacher, with which kids. It's all defined, and there's basically no agency. So this, of course, is kind of the opposite of life. Life is unpredictable. Life is changing at an incredible pace. I think we have to get used to the idea that it's maybe even changing faster as time goes on. But we can't even actually get used to the idea that it's changing at the same rate. And the last thing, of course, is it's very challenging. You're constantly dealing with problems with all kinds of things where the rules aren't defined. And you weren't prepared to deal with this very open situation. So what we really need is to be adaptable. What we really need is to be able to learn, to know how to learn. And we need to be entrepreneurial. And by that, I don't mean we all have to start startups or we all have to work in startups. Doesn't matter if you're working at a big company or you're starting your own little business, or even an artist. You have to think in terms of looking at the world and seeing problems, but seeing them as opportunities. And thinking of how you want to deal with the situation. This is entrepreneurial thinking. So here's a book that I highly recommend that you read called Humans Are Underrated. It's a book about the future of work. It's essentially a book about, we're not talking 50 years now, we're talking 5, 10, 20 years. We're talking 2035, which is when a lot of jobs, a lot of things that we do today will be automated, will be done by artificial intelligence. So what he writes is, what do we need to, how do we deal with this new world? And he basically says that the question that people are asking themselves is the wrong question. They ask themselves, what are computers going to do? And then I'll try to do what they can't do. The problem is that computers, AI, robots will be able to do just about anything. It used to be that the example of something that would be impossible for AI was to drive a car. And ironically, that's one of the first applications of AI. So don't think about what AI is not going to be able to do. We have to think about what do we want people to do even if AI can do it. For example, AI is going to be doing diagnosis. And already is beginning to be able to diagnose lots of things better than humans. The AI will have more data, both from ourselves and from the world and from science, than any doctor can hold in their head. But if the AI finds out that you have cancer, you don't want to hear that from an AI. You want to hear that from a doctor. You want to talk to a human being who's going to help you figure out what you want to do. So doctors are going to be dealing with human skills, not with diagnosis. And that's true with a lot of the jobs of the future. So that's why he's saying the meaning of great performance is not to be more machine-like. In a way, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and these other jobs, computer programs, whatever, are trying to do what are effectively algorithms as best they can. And AI is going to take over a lot of that work. So we have to not be more machine-like, better machines. We have to be better humans. That's what he's saying. So in this book, he narrows down 3 skills of the future. Very, very easy cheat sheet here. The first is empathy. And by empathy, he means not I feel your pain. By empathy, he means that you can understand how another person is feeling and respond appropriately. The second is teamwork. Now, of course, you need a lot of empathy and emotional intelligence to do teamwork, but they're not exactly the same thing. And why teamwork? Because that's how humans work. When you're dealing with other humans, you're dealing with teamwork. How do you do that? And the last one, most interesting, is storytelling. And there's actually some great stories in this book about the power of storytelling. Because you can be right, you can be rational, you can have the greatest arguments and the greatest data and the greatest PowerPoint, and you're not going to convince people. Because what convinces people is stories. We're wired to listen to stories. The minute Fred said, I'm going to tell you a story, everybody focuses, right? So we're wired to listen to stories, and that's what moves our mind. So storytelling, critical skill. Now I love, and in fact, I would say why I'm here today. Before I met Fred, I stumbled on African Leadership University, and I saw what you're doing the first year, and I saw these 7 meta skills. I say, that's it. That's the future. That's what we need most. That I have not seen anywhere. I've got to see this. I've got to understand this. So I think, and we're seeing the power of just that first year of these meta skills. But, we have to, there's so many different skills, we kind of have to sort them out in our mind. It's hard to get a handle on what exactly they are, but the first step is to understand that these are the things we need. And then we can kind of drill down and figure out more exactly what we're missing. This is a huge part. The reason we can't function when we leave the system is we don't know who we are. We don't know what we love. We don't know what we're good at, because we haven't had a chance to figure that out. We're lucky. Some people are lucky to figure that out along the way. But even, two of our daughters are great artists. One is a great dancer. They know they love this. They kind of stumbled on it. But, the oldest one is just now figuring out where she wants to go to school. And she loves art, but maybe she doesn't want to be an artist. Maybe she's a great writer. She's really interested in politics and social issues. Maybe she wants to do that. So what you're good at isn't necessarily what you want to do. And the only way to figure out, where you are in this picture is to keep having the experience of figuring that out. And you can only do that if you have agency. If you're faced throughout your educational period with an unstructured situation where you're forced to figure out what you want to do, what you love, who you are. So today, this is how education is. It's focused on knowledge. When we hear the word education, we think knowledge. And the life skills that we actually need, I think maybe a better word is human skills that we actually need. We're just expected to be born with, or we're expected to get them from the atmosphere. It's like, not my problem from the point of view of the education system. So I would suggest we need to flip that. We actually need to optimize for these other skills. And why not? I mean, does that mean knowledge is not important? Not at all. We need knowledge more than ever. We need to be deeply knowledgeable in at least one thing, maybe two things is better, two different things. I don't know, physics and French literature. I love when you have knowledge in very different areas, because that's where the creativity and the innovation comes from, at the interface at different things. There's actually a study, they studied all the Nobel Prize winners, and they looked at what they did, kind of what their hobbies were. And it turns out the ones who had these kind of hobbies, like music and whatever, are more likely to win a Nobel Prize. And of all the different things, I thought the one that was highest correlated with Nobel Prizes was theater. I thought that was interesting. So the reason to focus on life skills is not just that we need them so much, because that is how we're going to get the knowledge. The knowledge that sticks with us is not the knowledge we get by the spoon feeding, it's the knowledge we get by doing the things that get us the life skills. So let's try to flip education and actually focus first on these skills, and that's what ALU has done in its first year. So I want to talk a bit about what goes on in Israel and why we have so many startups. And not surprising, it's not in our education system. Our education system is about as Prussian as everybody else. We have our innovative exceptions. It's not completely lost, but the basic structure is still that 200-year-old structure. But we have outside of that a whole track that starts when you're, say, 10 years old. You go into scouts. You go into these youth movements. And I Googled around, I found that there are actually 1 million scouts in Africa from the global scouting movement. But whatever kind of movement you call it, it's a youth movement. And what happens in these things? So my wife and I, we grew up in the United States. We moved to Israel about 24 years ago. All our kids were born in Israel. So they started in this scout movement, and then every summer they collect a lot of the hundreds, even 1,000 scouts from different places, and they all go to a forest. in the middle of nowhere. And they build things like this. And they compete with each other to build the most creative things. And what's really striking from an American background is you go in there and there are no adults. Hundreds and hundreds of kids. And the closest thing to an adult, maybe there's one doctor and one parent is helping to cook the food. And then there are two guys at the front gate who are guarding, and they're 22, they're post-army, and they're the grown-ups, okay? So this is Israel. Our education minister, when he talked to education ministers in Jerusalem, he didn't talk much about education. He talked about when he was 16. And he and another kid his age in the Scouts, they took 60 kids out to the desert for a hike. No adults. Now, if you tried that in America, you get arrested. I mean, the idea that two 15-year-olds can take care of 60 10-year-olds on a hike, that's like, but in Israel, we know we sort of have to toughen them up a bit. We know we have to give them the experience of having challenges. We know we have to give them this experience of responsibility because they're on a track. And the next part of this track, this is a new thing, they have a gap year program that our kids also went through. And there it's even more intense. You spend a year studying, part of it is study, part is volunteering, part is traveling around the country. They even have a thing called Survival Week where you head off with your sleeping bags and you're in groups of 4 and you're navigating day and night, and you have like a little thing of rice and something to cook with, and you have to figure out how to deal. So that's the next level of challenge. And then you get to the real things, which is the military. Now, we have a very strange military in Israel. I always say this, particularly when I'm in China, don't try this at home. This is not the way to become innovative. We wish we didn't have to serve in the military. And it's certainly not designed to make you innovative. What it is designed to do is throwing challenges and responsibility at you constantly. And what's particularly unusual about the Israeli military is the extent that the responsibilities are driven downward. If you're 21 years old in other places, you're not going to be making serious decisions, life and death decisions in command and managing millions of dollars of equipment or dealing with very high levels of intelligence and so on. But that's what happens in Israel, is they put a tremendous amount of responsibility on your shoulders. And it's real, it's a job. The buck stops with you. You have to do it. You can't blame anybody else. Now, and they keep throwing challenges at you that seem impossible. And you have this experience, this also happens in the Gap Year program. You have this experience of doing things that you thought you couldn't do. Think how empowering that is. You realize you can do more. We have to push our kids in this way. So all of these things together, and many other factors we talk about in the book, are what made us Startup Nation. We're very mission oriented. We know how to get stuff done, and we learn this outside of school. So I think when we kind of drill down how can we do all these skills? How can we get all these skills? I think we have to think in terms of challenges and responsibility. And the more real the challenges are and the more real the responsibility is, the more it will have an impact on us and the more motivated we will be to tackle those challenges. And there's no shortage of challenges, not just in Africa, in everywhere. They're all around us, in our communities. So we can make these things real if we want to. But we can't forget the humanities, okay? When we get so focused on problem solving, on technical skills, on computer science and whatever, If we need human skills, we should look to the thing that has the word human in it. There's a reason why the word human is in humanities. Okay, it's basically the study of humans. The way we learn about humans is not just interacting and solving problems and working on teams, all of those things, but we also learn from literature, from art, from music. We have to develop ourselves, our character, and we have to be well-rounded. So let's not give up the humanities. Philosophy. You know, philosophy majors, you might think, well, how are they going to get a job? Well, actually now, I've run into people who work at banks who were philosophy majors. And the bank probably preferred a philosophy major than to an MBA. Because they're looking for people who can think, who want to think, who can write, who can communicate. And maybe the MBA can do that, maybe not. So don't forget the humanities. Now, I want to end with this. Africa can be the place where the future of education is born. And I want to say that the lack of education here, the problems with the shortage of teachers, with the shortage of schools, the fact that not enough people go to high school or university, think of these as assets. Think of these as creating the possibility that you can start with a blank piece of paper. I mean, go try to change the American education system. Good luck with that. It's much more institutionalized, much more rigid, much harder to move. Here you're starting with weaker institutions, and again, that's an advantage. That's why Africa can lead, and that's, I think, why I found what I was looking for at African Leadership University, those 7 meta skills. Because you were able to think differently. And if anybody knows of this happening somewhere else, please tell me. But it happened here first in Africa, and that's not just a revolution for Africa, it's a revolution for the world. But I also want to mention another thing that's so important, is kids teaching kids. That's what runs through scouting. You know, the adults don't figure everything out. The 15-year-olds take care of the 10-year-olds. There's hundreds of kids in the forest, they're taking care of each other. This is part of giving kids responsibility and challenges. You want to let kids run things as much as possible, and also because when you teach, you learn, and everybody can teach something. And think about that. Think about how many people we're leaving behind today. Only 10%, 8%, whatever, 2% maybe of the incoming, of the people of a certain age are actually successful in the system as measured by academic success. We can't accept that. We can't accept 2% success and 98% people feel like they haven't succeeded. But if everybody can teach something, then everybody succeeds. Everybody, you know, there have to be paths to success for everyone. Everybody can grow, can do personal growth. All those skills, we're not going to be able to do every one of them, but every one of them we can do better. So a huge part of this is not 98% failing, that everybody can succeed. And the last point is, when I was in China, I spoke at a big education conference. And there was huge education companies. And it was an orgy of big data and artificial intelligence. That's not going to work. Okay, you can sprinkle all the AI you want on the Prussian system. It's not going to be a post-Prussian system. We need to create a post-Prussian system, a system that's as different as the horse is from the car. Okay, we're not talking about a faster horse. We're talking about something completely different. And the only obstacle to doing this, it's not lack of technology. In fact, it takes no technology to change the way we think. But changing the way we think is the hardest thing. imagining where we want to go and moving in that direction, that is the most important thing. If we can imagine this new kind of education, we can get there. Thank you.